This screencast is designed to introduce Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar to a Year 8 class, that is a Key Stage 3 class, aged around 12 years old, and I'm preparing it for my 2 Year 8 classes at Upton Court Grammar School for the spring term at the start of 2014. So, before we start reading the play, we need to be really aware that this play is based on real history. Shakespeare's plays generally can be divided into three camps: his comedies, broadly, his tragedies that are not necessarily based on a real event, shall we say, but discuss how the human nature can be perverted or altered by circumstance. And in the middle are Shakespeare's history plays. Now, most of these focus on English history, history of the Middle Ages, the Wars of the Roses. But Julius Caesar is an example of one that was written about real people from ancient Rome, time well before Shakespeare, and a time for which he had plentiful sources, in particular in the shape of the Roman writer Plutarch, who had written biographies of all the major characters of ancient Rome. Shakespeare had these, and he used them to create a play for a variety of reasons, which we'll look at in a minute. But a history is important. We have to remember that as the play begins, Rome is ruled by the Senate. You can see all this on the screen, but Rome is ruled by the Senate, and the Senate are wealthy men who have been elected into power. Two of their number are consuls each year, who, if you like, are a double prime minister almost. And that is how Rome was ruled. It was ruled not with a single figure of power. Ever since, in 753 BC, the kings of Rome had been overthrown. By the time of the play, one man is dominating Rome. That man is Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar has been part of a three-man ruling group, but they've fallen out with each other. Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus are no longer ruling. Crassus is dead. Pompey has been defeated in war by Caesar, and Caesar, as the play opens, is returning to Rome. For those who wish Rome to remain a republic, somewhere ruled, if you like, by the people, this is a time of terror and tension. Everything is resting at the beginning of the play on whether Caesar is going to take the title of king. And that tension then sets up the action of the play and also defines the characters within the play, between those who are happy for Caesar to become king and are therefore on his side and will support him, and those who are against it, whether because of their own personal jealousies or whether because they believe that it is wrong for a single man to hold power. The point about kings is important. The kings of Rome had become deeply corrupt. Ultimately, King Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquinius is his name, Superbus is an epithet meaning proud, had been driven out of Rome by a man called Lucius Brutus. In this play, we meet Brutus, a descendant of that same Brutus that had got rid of the kings, and he will be the focus of opposition to Caesar. History may or may not repeat itself, and that's what this play is about. What I'd like you to do at this stage is just to pause this screencast and just very quickly, you can do it online, you can Google it, you might even use Wikipedia, just get a very quick research about the characters that are listed above. You can make very brief notes about each so that you are familiar with the names and familiar with the ideas. At the start of the play, the argument between the crowd, the plebs, and the two relatively noble men hinges on whether one remembers Pompey. We need to understand who Pompey was. You can do some research, quick notes on each, and then begin to think about this, and maybe again jot down some notes. Why is it that the idea of a king is so undesirable to many of the people in Rome? So, There you go. Pause now and research, and then come back to the screen. On the screen now, we've got an idea of how important Rome was. Again, I don't need to talk too much over this. The yellow on the map is the size of the Roman Empire at the death of Caesar. Now we can see that it grew and grew and grew, but this is the empire that Caesar inherited in yellow. Yes, there's still undefeated areas in northern Spain, certainly through what is sort of Austria and Yugoslavia, undefeated at the moment and heading off into the east. But the key to this, I think, in many ways, are the areas in North Africa, the areas in Asia, the areas in Syria. A lot of Rome's food came from these areas by sea. This is a large part of the known world to seek to rule. The man who rules it, if it falls into the single grasp of a single person, has essentially power over virtually the whole of the known world as far as the Romans were concerned. There is a lot at stake. So in the play we follow the events surrounding Caesar's return, and he's offered the crown by Mark Antony, and we'll see in the first act how there is a staged event where Antony offers Caesar the crown not once, not twice, but 3 times. We know that 3 is always an important number in all forms of art and literature, and each time Caesar refuses the crown. Would he have accepted it on the 4th? We don't know. But once this is in motion, Caesar's enemies can seize on what they see as his apparent willingness to take the crown. There is a plot against him, and again Shakespeare, because it is the way of his writing, is commenting here on the situation in England. He is commenting on what happens when a leader is deposed, especially one with no heir. At the time that Shakespeare wrote, Queen Elizabeth I, who had ruled for a long time, had always refused to marry, and it was of great concern in England as to who would follow her to the throne. She had no heir, and the problem with a monarch dying with no clear heir is that it opens up room for civil war. The play is a tragedy. We will spend time discussing what a tragedy is. It's not simply sad. There is a reason that plays are called tragedies, and this goes back to ancient Greece, to a man called Aristotle, who, if you like, set down the rules in the 5th century BC. It centres on the question of nobility and what that means. In simple terms, it centres on the question of whether we, as individuals, should do what is easy or what is right. Sometimes those two things are the same. Sometimes they aren't. And we'll look to see how Shakespeare wrote, how he creates the powerful imagery that he does, how he uses particularly the verse in this poem, as ever, in iambic pentameter, which you worked on in the first part of the autumn term, to create images in our heads that stay forever. This play is a play full of memorable quotations and memorable images. We'll learn more about writing analysis, again, something you started to work on back in the autumn when we were looking at poetry and the Odyssey. And generally, I hope we will mix actually playing around with staging moments of the play, annotating texts and creating artwork, perhaps to illuminate some of the central and most powerful speeches within the play, and formally turning all that knowledge into essays that are going to work, if you like, when you need them to gain you marks in exams. One of the joys of this play, I think, for Elizabethans, and this is a play that Shakespeare wrote to open the Globe Theatre. It's full of special effects, it's full of supernatural effect, of ghosts, of terrible storms, but also it's full of characters that every educated Elizabethan would know. To the Elizabethans, education, broadly speaking, meant you learnt maths and you learnt classics. and little else. And every educated member of the crowd, and several only semi-educated members of the audience, would know who Julius Caesar was, who Marcus Brutus was, who Mark Antony was, who Octavius Caesar was, and who he would become. They would know these things. There would be a familiarity with this play which would enable the audience to concentrate on what Shakespeare is telling them about the nature of the events he describes and the characters within the play, rather than struggling to follow the plot. This is the reason why, in setting up this before we start reading, I really want you to do some background research, so that you're not always struggling because you're not sure who these characters are. We should know as soon as they appear whether they are on Caesar's side or not. And also, we should all know the outcome of various people's lives. If we have that, we don't have to worry about what's going to happen. We worry about the subtext, the issues underneath, the areas that Shakespeare wishes to explore. As a spoiler, it's worth noting that Caesar himself dies halfway through this play. Whether this play is fairly titled Julius Caesar, I'm not sure. For me, this play is the tragedy of Brutus. And actually, in our teaching and our studying, it's Brutus that we will be spending a lot of time considering. Beyond that, various other well-known Roman characters appear in the play. Cicero, a writer, an orator, a speechwriter. All Elizabethan schoolboys will have read Cicero to great length in their studies. Now, as we read this play in the 21st century, there's often cries from people saying, well, why are we reading it? Why are we reading Shakespeare? Shakespeare's written in Old English, he's boring. Well, he isn't, frankly. He's not written in Old English, he's written in his English, and the English that he wrote because he happened to live in the 16th century. We get used to that, and we get used to the verse and everything else. And actually, this play is not a play that is staggeringly complex in language. But I think one of the reasons we read Shakespeare, and this is what I want you to play with, actually, as the homework relating to this, after you've done a bit of research, is looking for parallels between this play and the world we live in now. And on this slide and the following slide, I've put some pictures of well-known statesmen, politicians, public figures. They are all well known. They may not be well known to you in Year 8, and part of the game might well be for you to, whether by showing this to your parents or by undertaking, again, further internet research, to actually find out about these people. I've put a list of categories they might fall into at the end. And I'd like you to start to put these sort of figures into the categories they might fall into, with a view to relating them later on in the process to the characters in the play, and beginning to see some of the ideas from the play being relevant to the world that we live in today. So I'm not going to tell you who they are, that's for you to find out. Just let them roll forward. A lot of well-known figures here. What are they? What are their characteristics? What do they show, if you like, in terms of the power they held, the positions they hold, that we might see in this play? And here, finally, the categories for you to look at. They can fall into more than one, but I think it's very useful if we begin to get a handle on what it is that makes people seek power or behave in the way that they do once they have achieved it, because that is what this play is about. Now, I hope that I've whetted your appetite, Year 8, and I hope that we will have a lot of fun with this play. It's a play I'm very fond of. It's a play I've taught a fair few times, and I think it's a play that actually we can really get into and have a lot of success with. So you've got a couple of tasks to get on with. Have fun doing your research and have fun thinking about what is power. See you later.